Good evening, everybody. Good evening. So nice to see all of you. Welcome to all of those who are joining us here in person and to those joining us by live stream. So for those of you who I have not yet met, I'm Rabbi Shani Abramowitz, the new rabbi here at Ohavay Zion Synagogue. And I'm still very, very new in town, and I'm looking forward very much to spending time with you all tonight and learning a little bit more about what is sitting on your hearts and your minds as we dive into this very important conversation tonight as a community. And of course, we wish that this conversation about anti-Semitism weren't necessary. And we of course wish that we didn't need to carve out time in our week to reckon with this big, important, and difficult topic. But unfortunately, this is our reality. But I am comforted by the fact that we are having this discussion together, and we are lucky to be joined tonight by Chief Lawrence Weathers, Supervisory Senior Resident Agent T.J. Hanna, Commander Brad Ingram, and Lieutenant Paul Boyles of the Lexington Police Department and the FBI. Welcome. And thank you to Mindy Haas, Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of the Bluegrass, and everyone who worked hard to bring this important community discussion to life. And I see that, I'll put my mask on in just a second, I see that everyone is wearing their masks. Thank you so much for respecting and honoring our current COVID protocols here at OZS. And I'm gonna ask that we all remain masked for the duration of our program. And thank you again for all coming out, for being here, both with us in person this evening and on the live stream. And I'm gonna hand it over to Mindy.
Thank you, Rabbi. It is so wonderful to have you join our community. It has been an honor to meet you and to spend time with you. And good evening and welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to have this very important discussion. Tonight we talk about anti-Semitism. As Jews, many of us feel it, see it, and are sometimes confronted with it. One thing we know is that it makes us uncomfortable. So when we recognize it, how do we handle it? Let alone, how do we report it? Tonight we're going to have a conversation with Chief Weathers, Supervisory Senior Resident Agent T.J. Hanna, Commander Brad Ingram, and Lieutenant Paul Boyles from the Lexington Police Department. Now let's get to know them a little. Chief Weathers is a native of Lexington. He joined the Lexington Division of Police in 1989. In July of 2016, he became Assistant Chief Weathers and was selected as the Director of Law Enforcement for Fayette County Public Schools. On March 4th, 2018, he was sworn in as our Chief of Police. Supervisory Senior Resident Agent T.J. Hanna is currently assigned as a Supervisory Special Agent for the FBI Lexington Resident Agency in the Louisville Division, where he serves as the FBI Public Corruption and Civil Rights Coordinator for the state of Kentucky. Commander Brad Ingram is a native of Lexington as well. He joined the Lexington Division of Police in 1993 and has been with the police department for 29 years. He currently serves as the commander over the Bureau of Investigations, Criminal Investigations. And then Lieutenant Paul Boyles has been employed by the Lexington Police Department since February 2006. He heads the Lexington Police Department Ethics Program and is also an instructor for Kentucky Crisis Intervention Team Training Course, which is a program for helping officers assist those suffering in crisis due to mental illness. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you. Before we start, I do want to make sure that we are all on the same page. The ADL defines anti-Semitism as the marginalization and oppression of Jews. Parallel to all systems of oppression, anti-Semitism manifests as exploitation of, discrimination against, violence against, and dehumanization of the Jewish people based on stereotypes and disinformation. In 2020, there was a study through the Pew Research study, and here are some of the findings. Jewish Americans generally perceive a rise in anti-Semitism. more than 9 in 10 U.S. Jews surveyed said there is at least some form of anti-Semitism in America. And 3/4 say there is more anti-Semitism in the U.S. today than there was 5 years ago. 5% that were surveyed said they stayed away from Jewish programming and events due to safety concerns. And over the past year, 6 in 10 Jews reported having experienced anti-Semitism via graffiti, vandalism, online harassment, physical attacks, or hearing someone repeat an anti-Semitic trope. Kind of interesting, but not so surprising. So now let's go ahead and pose some of our questions to our officers and open this discussion tonight. We will have, hopefully, an opportunity to get questions from the audience as we move along. And when we get to that point, we would ask you to please stand up. If you need to remove your mask so we can hear you, we'd appreciate that. I am going to put my mask back on because I will be talking directly to the officers now. So this is really up to whoever wants to field the questions, so we appreciate whoever wants to jump up would be great. So question number 1. Since 2019, there has been an increase in the number of reported incidents in Kentucky, which has also increased in Lexington. Can you help us understand the data and what this means?
Good evening, everybody. As she said, and she introduced me, Ms. Haas introduced me, I'm Chief Lawrence Weathers with the Lexington Police Department. I think, first of all, let me say this. As a police officer for over 30 years, I realized one thing very quickly. People who are afraid or who live in fear suffer greatly, more so than other people, I think, because that fear leads to unequal treatment, unequal services. It leads to unwarranted attacks. And when I say unwarranted attacks, I'm not just talking about physical, I'm talking about mental as well. And my job is to protect people. And when people are in fear, they don't report things the way they should. So we're here tonight to let you know, as well as anybody else who's feeling oppressed or feeling afraid, is that you can come to us. And when you come to us, something will be done. Now, as far as answering the question, several people are here with me that go over that information and can probably explain it a lot better than I can. When you hear about the increases that are occurring, Lexington is probably not the leader in that. However, we can't ignore that. If it's happening someplace else, it could easily spread here. We don't want people to feel like that's going to come this way, or if it does come this way, nothing will be done about it. So we have had a couple of incidents here, but what I want you to understand from talking to these people up here is that we don't care how small the complaint is, they are all taken seriously and they're all looked into. So Commander Ingram, do you want to come up and talk?
Yeah, this is fine.
Thank you, Chief. Again, my name is Brad Ingram. I'm the commander of the Bureau of Investigations, Criminal Investigations with the Lexington Police Department. So I want to thank you all for inviting us. I do think it's a very important conversation for us to have. I think it's very critical and important for us to hear from you all, from the people in your community, of how you feel. I think what we can speak about specifically to Lexington Police is what has been reported to the Lexington Police. I don't have any way of knowing if the numbers have increased if we don't hear about them, if they're not reported to Lexington. And I think that's what part of our message will be tonight. It is very important for you to contact us. And the biggest reason behind that we hear most often as to why people don't call us is, well, I didn't think it was that important, or I didn't want to bother you, or I didn't think it was anything you all would do anything about. And that couldn't be further from the truth. We have to hear from people. We have to hear how you feel whether you think it's something just minor. We need to know about that. We can create reports, we can document that, because it may be one time for you, maybe an isolated incident to you, but the person doing it, it could be their 15th or 20th time doing it to single people along the way. If no one calls to report it, we don't know it exists. Another myth that happens is people get on social media and talk about stuff, or people get on Ring apps or neighborhood apps and talk about it. And I think they just wrongly assume that we monitor those apps and those conversations, and we don't. And somebody in those groups somewhere along the way will say, "What did you call the police?" "What do you mean did I call the police? We've been talking about this for 3 months. Did somebody not call the police?" Well, we don't know if you don't call us. We looked back in preparation for this meeting, and I really appreciate Mindy inviting all of us to come and talk. We started the conversation a few weeks ago, and here we are tonight. We look back since 2017 for Lexington Police, and we have 4 reported incidents for anti-Jewish hate crimes. Of those 4, I don't think we really articulated that. In fact, we could prove that it truly was motivated by somebody's bias against Jews. And so I think the ADL's numbers are higher. I think you'll hear from Special Agent Hanna with the FBI. They have different numbers as well. And so what it brought to highlight for me was we have to be sharing this information. We all have the same job. We just do it differently. And Special Agent Hanna will talk about the federal laws and how they apply. And they're different from the state and local laws that we can enforce. But it's critically important that we continue to have the conversations and we hear from people when you feel like something has happened to you. Because if we don't hear from that, there's not much we can do about it. But when we do, when we are made aware, it gets investigated immediately on scene by the reporting officer. They are to call a supervisor who comes to that scene as a second layer of oversight to ensure that everything's being done correctly. And then that report gets assigned to Lieutenant Boyles up in the personal crime section, and he then oversees that entire investigation. And at the end of it, he will then say, yes, I believe this in fact was a hate crime, or no, this was a crime that just happened to have happened to a Jewish person. And we can get into the specifics of what that looks like. I'll let Lieutenant Boyles speak onto that if you want to, or we can take the next question.
No, please go ahead.
I've got something to add.
Yeah, can TJ speak first?
Or go ahead, and then I'll just go after you. Sure, it's fine. Okay. I didn't want to go to the next question.
So in addition to the ethics program, which is near and dear to my heart, and certainly one of my priorities, I am also the lieutenant over the personal crime section. That includes robbery, homicide, and violent crimes. We are also by policy tasked with investigating all allegations of hate and bias crime. And maybe a little self-serving on my part, but you want the detectives that I work with investigating those cases. They are certainly the A-team detectives, and that's why they get assigned those cases in particular, in addition to shootings and homicides. That's the level of seriousness that we put into it. As Commander Ingram said, it's very important to us I was never a homicide detective. Spent some time in crimes against children, and seeing how these detectives work these cases. Most people think that you have to report a crime, that it has to be an obvious crime, and that it has to be something big to rise to the level of our concern, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Every bit of information that we get may not be actionable in that moment, but that becomes the what we call the field interview. So if you call and say, hey, I saw this suspicious car, I've seen it a few times. I've got just this vehicle description or the description of someone in the car, someone you see walking around your neighborhood, and there's just something not right. Calling the police for something like that is absolutely, it's appropriate and it's very important. Because what happens then is 2-3 months down the road, we get the report of serious, somebody damages your synagogue, somebody damages your home, spray paints that graffiti. The detectives don't just look at that incident and what's around that day. They start doing a historical on that area or people that match that description or just that general behavior. And so that little suspicion or concern that you had, if it's documented by us, gets put together with someone else's and we build that, and then it becomes, so your little bit of the puzzle down the road may become that key towards putting an actual a violent offender or a truly criminal offender and a repeat offender in jail. And we don't know those little bits of information without you. We are 500 plus people, and that sounds like a lot, but in a community of 330, that's not enough. We are auxiliaries, if I can use a little philosophical speak, to you all. We work for you, and we depend on you for that, to be our eyes and ears. And so I think this is probably a question that you have maybe down the road. What can you do? Be a good witness and report that information. And I will, calling an officer to come out there in that moment who can maybe make contact with this person. And sometimes just that officer presence in the neighborhood, even if they don't locate who you're talking about, that is going to, everybody sees that. So your neighbors see that, you see that, and as Chief said, it gives you that bit of comfort that, yeah, we actually do come out and will respond. It also lets the people in those neighborhoods around your synagogue know, oh, they're paying attention, and I'll go somewhere else or do my whatever it is I'm doing elsewhere. So please don't hesitate to call. If you think it's all, I have several of my business cards. I'll hand them out. Send me an email. I prefer not to get bombarded with 1,000 emails, but if that's what it takes really to give you all a level of service and comfort, I don't mind responding to a few emails and knocking out a few very small reports that could help a detective down the road. So that's really my message tonight, is our detectives are the best anywhere, and it's humbling to even call myself their supervisor, but they can't do it without the information that you provide, no matter how small. So please, as he said, 4 reports, 5 or 6 reports, depending on how you count them. But I'm certain there's more out there. I'm certain each one of you has had more suspicions. But if we don't know about it, we can't take action on it. So.
Well, thank you all. Oh, did you?
Well, it's a sort of question I hope you continue to address. Would somebody address the importance of, while recording, waiting to label something ahead of time until you all have investigated and determined it is one?
And I
Can you repeat what she just said as well?
Yeah, so what the young lady was saying was that how it's important for us to, as reporting folks or as witnesses, to hold off necessarily judging something a certain way without necessarily knowing all the facts of the matter before rushing to judgment with that. Is that accurate? Okay, all right. All right, so I'm T.J. Hanna with the FBI. I echo everything that these fine folks from Lexington PD said up here, and if I could specifically talk about what Commander Ingram said about the prioritization of civil rights with the FBI. Civil rights violations are, that threat is the #1 criminal priority for the FBI across the entire nation. It's higher than gangs and drugs and crimes against children and public corruption and all the other major things that happen in our country. But that's how important the civil rights threat is to us with the FBI. Now, I will say that is for the criminal side. We all have a national security side as well, which, you know, the counterintelligence, national security, JTTF, counterterrorism, type matters, those are a high priority as well. But on the criminal side of the house, civil rights is the #1 priority for us. And what is surprising as well to me, especially as the coordinator for public corruption across the entire state, is the fact that to demonstrate this priority, the Louisville field office has more civil rights cases open than any other field office in the entire FBI. And you think of that, well, I mean, that may not be a bad thing or a good thing, but to me it is a good thing that we have so many open investigations, because I know that we don't have more incidents of hate crimes than Chicago or New York, but we have more cases open on that threat than any of those big cities do. And that to me shows that we do actually, we practice what we preach. If this is going to be a priority, let's work it. And like these folks were saying, where they put their best detectives on this sort of crime, we put our best agents on this crime. Our best agents in the field office are working the Breonna Taylor case up in Louisville, the very best. And some of them were taken off of other squads to work that case as a civil rights matter because they were so good. And that's a priority for us. I believe the first question talked about some of the data and trying to clear up maybe where some of this data is coming from. If you look at the ADL website, and I'm sure many of you have, you'll see the different incidents that happen. Many of those incidents are taken from folks who have made that initial report, or a headline that's out there that talks about this horrific crime was observed in a certain part of the city. What it doesn't do is go back later and kind of update that and say, oh, actually, yeah, that was a horrible crime, but that had nothing to do with that individual's race or ethnic background or religion. And that's one thing that I think, kind of skews the numbers a little bit. And, you have social media now, and, they talk about the rise and how more people feel threatened out there. I do too, because of social media, I think, because it's in our face every day, all the time. And, back 50 years ago when they didn't have that necessarily, yeah, it existed, and it might have existed as much as it did today, but it wasn't in everybody's face all the time on their phones and on their computers and on their tablets and whatever else that they look at all day. So that's something to consider there. There's another database that everybody has access to. It's called the Universal Crime Reporting. Universal Crime Reporting, UCR is how we kind of name it in law enforcement world. But basically, this database is set up for law enforcement to report all incidents of civil rights violations. And I guess I should also compartment the civil rights violation with the FBI as kind of two different buckets. We have the color of law violations, which deal with, say, law enforcement or correction officers inside prisons, them abusing their power, versus the hate crimes, which would fit more into targeting individuals for their race or ethnic background or religious preference, things like that. So when you talk about the civil rights program altogether with the FBI, we have a lot more cases in the color of law bucket than we do the hate crime bucket. But the UCR will, if you go into that website, you can actually look at the specific hate crime data. You can look at the region that it's at, and they actually have a heat map that you can kind of hover over, and it'll show like, okay, Lexington, here's how many incidents that have been reported to the UCR by law enforcement. And in that too, it kind of vets out some of the stuff that, hey, it started off maybe as a hate crime, but then as investigation was done, they determined, no, it was just, wrong place, wrong time type stuff, and not necessarily a hate crime. So I would encourage everybody, obviously we all want to be informed the best that we can. So instead of just using one resource, maybe tap into the second resource too, to kind of vet some of that information. To give you guys an idea, another thing to advise, the UCR is a year behind. So the information that's on that website today is from 2019. It takes us a year to get all that information and make sure it's correct. So at the end of 2021, the 2020 data will come out and you'll be able to see that. And I'm very interested to see the change in 2019 to 2020, especially in Kentucky, because I have been out beating the bushes, talking to people about how important it is for folks to report this information to law enforcement. We don't know about it unless we hear it from the people that have witnessed it. essentially. Now, every now and again, we'll see something in a newspaper and look a little bit deeper into it, but the main source of our cases comes from citizens, from victims, from witnesses, and it is highly important that you do report this stuff. For Kentucky, for the entire nation, for 2019, 7,314 incidents were reported to the UCR. In Kentucky, 146 incidents were reported, and that is with 410 law enforcement agencies in Kentucky reporting those incidents. For FBI cases, for the entire Bureau, in 2019, there was 126 cases. In 2020, there was 207. I think a lot of that can come from what we experienced in the spring of 2020, but there was definitely a rise in the number of cases in the entire FBI. For Louisville field office, for just Kentucky cases, in 2019, we had 6 open cases. In 2020, we had 9, and so far in 2021, we have 4. Okay, so that'll give you an idea of some of the cases that have risen to the level where we do think that there actually was a violation of the law, and we are going to focus our investigative resources towards that goal. And like I said, we have more civil rights cases than any other field office in Kentucky or in the United States. Altogether, we have 28 total civil rights cases currently. Cincinnati, just across the river north of us, they have 7. Cleveland has 11. Memphis has 17. Knoxville has 14, and Chicago has 9. So, I mean, it's kind of amazing, those numbers. Here we are, little old Kentucky, we have 28. A pretty big number, but that is stressing the point that we do prioritize this, and we make a lot of effort and ensure that we are giving these good attention. Our best agents are on it, and we want to ensure that we are providing a good service to our citizens.
All right, thank you. So they answered a lot of my questions, but we're going to elaborate a little bit more on it. Let's take a question from the audience.
Yeah, I'm curious, when you talk about the incidences, when you talk about individual instances, and well, what I'm concerned about is the rise in organized activity and what's going on and what's being done to address that. I have to tell you, being born a Jew, going through periods in my life of anti-Semitism, I've never seen anything on the scale that I'm seeing today. And, you know, the media has certainly heightened the sensitivity to what's taking place. What happened in Charlottesville, that anger, that venom, that hate, is evident to anyone who's been in this room or anyone who's ever experienced this kind of atrocities before. And then what happened in Pittsburgh and elsewhere. But we're talking about groups that feel emboldened to say that they are superior to another race. And we represent, what, 2% of the population? So what are we doing? And I realize this is a huge question, and education has got to be involved. Different faiths have to be actively engaged. What's being done to address this core group that feels emboldened to do whatever they want to do?
So, I guess to start off, those groups, those racially motivated violent extremist groups that we're seeing that are all over the internet, they're on, I mean, it is a tragedy what you see when you go on some of those chat groups and the ideas that they have and the preparations that they talk about and the organization that goes into it, an absolute tragedy. The FBI does look at those. When we look at those groups or the individuals more specifically inside those groups that are talking those horrible things and planning those horrible plans, that kind of falls into the domestic terrorism bucket, and that's how we're putting that. Now, on a domestic terrorism case, oftentimes when we work though, because we want to ensure that we're looking at all facets of the criminal law, not just the civil rights violations that they're endeavoring into. But as we look at that, oftentimes when we do charge somebody who's involved in a terroristic threat or a terroristic activity, they are being charged with hate crime or civil rights type statutes, along with firearms violations and other types of federal crimes that help thwart this stuff. Those aren't going to be necessarily captured in the UCR. They're not going to be captured in a straight up civil rights violation because they are captured within a domestic terrorism investigation for the FBI. But these, and I mean, you hear it from the president on down to the director of the FBI. Domestic terrorism is another very, very high priority for the FBI, and we focus a lot of resources on that effort as well. Did I answer your question?
You gave a good shot at it.
Okay.
Well, I'll try to speak to it a little bit more on a local level. Just trying to figure out how to say this, but our police department is broken up into various bureaus and various units. Among those units, we have an intelligence unit that works very closely with all our local partners and our federal partners. In addition to that, we have officers assigned to specific federal agencies to work as partners, and one of them is the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is run by the FBI. Information from around the country. Social media, the internet, has actually made the world very small. Things that happen someplace else immediately get sent to us. What our intelligence unit does is track anybody who may be, or we may feel, is associated to one of those other groups or one of those other acts that happens anywhere else in the country. And all of that information is shared, not just with our federal partners, but with our local law enforcement partners as well. We keep tabs on them. As part of that, we also have a violent crimes unit that if we get information that these people might also be part of that happened somewhere else and may be or could be planning to do something here, we go after it. We don't sit around and wait for it to happen. Hi, we're checking on you. We heard that you were part of this and that we understand that you're a member of this group and this typically. Do you have this or that? Or sometimes we conduct surveillance, immediately go out and conduct surveillance to see if these people are involved in any kind of acts that might affect things here locally. We have a gang unit, which people typically think just handles local street gangs and local street information, but we handle all kinds of groups in that. Even some of the hate groups might fit into our categories of gangs. So all of that information is sent to us and disseminated out to all the people that we work with. So we immediately become aware of what's going on. Don't think for one moment that the things that happened down at the Capitol in DC didn't immediately get looked at by us. And then say, okay, were there any local law enforcement there? Were there any of my people there? Who was there? And we have such a great partnership with law enforcement here in Kentucky that we can pick up the phone and call and get the information that we need, and they can call us and get the information they need. So information sharing is the key, and that's what we utilize. But we just don't rest on our laurels with that. We try to gather enough information so it can transform that into action if needed. So.
Quick question. The division of what happened on January 6th, and I saw that the fellow who was wearing the Camp Abramowitz t-shirt, and the other one that was the 6 million Jews weren't enough. If I was to see somebody wearing that shirt, would I call you guys?
You could, and again, to what they were speaking about, it might not be illegal, but it's that little piece of the puzzle that might come into play later. So yes, we need to know about it.
So Chief beat me to the punch on the intelligence unit. We work very closely with that unit. They're not part of my section, violent crimes is, but I see all of their emails come through, and I've specifically asked to be on. So and it's, again, a very impressive thing to watch happen when information comes in from the FBI and other places, and how people get into action, and the information sharing on our end from, as Chief said, some of those things where it's somebody in a t-shirt, or okay, well, we've got this information, they aren't part of that group. One thing I do want to reiterate is, or I guess comfort, is that we monitor those groups very closely and nobody's resting on their laurels, but what we don't see is them gaining a foothold in Lexington. And I think that's very important to note, that that's the kind of community we have. We saw it last year during the protests. We know we had Antifa here, but they left very quickly because this town just isn't built to support and sustain those kinds of groups. But as I said, we're not resting on our laurels with that. That's why we have the intel unit, because we want to keep it that way. If it's small, then it's too big and we want it gone. But I think for all of the national trends, the national groups, and how close that feels because of social media, they're not prevalent here, and that's because we take active steps to monitor them, contact them, and if they're bigger than we think because of what you all see, then you definitely let us know that. But no, you see a gentleman with a some of those, I won't even repeat what's on them, that's something that may not be a crime, may not be something that would even be reason for us to make contact, but it's certainly something we want to know.
And if I could just piggyback real quick on that, an incident that I'm sure some of you are aware of here in Lexington was anti-Semitic flyers and Patriot Front flyers that were around. If you go to the ADL website, every one of those flyers that was located, turned in, reported is an incident. For us, we want to know, and I've heard from some of you reporting, hey, we found one of these on somebody's driveway or at a certain location. I love getting that because that helps me paint a bigger picture. I will say though, even though that information on that flyer is insulting and it's vulgar and it's bad, it's First Amendment because there weren't those specific threats. The FBI knows who created those flyers. They're not around here. What we're still working on is identifying who here is placing those in people's driveways and on people's cars and around the city.
So I guess my next question would be about the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Many of us in the Jewish communal world know that the Anti-Defamation League is here to, help us get through some of the situations that we're dealing with when it comes to anti-Semitism. But when it comes to actually reporting, is the police department the first line of defense for us, or would it be to report to the ADL and get their advice on what we should do? Part of me says, if there's a threat in any way, I would call my local police department. Others feel that they might not be trusted in what they have to say, or we overreact, or whatever it is. So how would you, Chief, what would you recommend to our community when it comes to reporting?
That's very simple for me. Call your police department first. The ADL information is good, but as far as follow-up investigations and stuff like that, that's what we do. So call us first. It's like they were talking about on Ring and on Next Door. You get that information out there, but nothing gets done about it. We actually get that information, and if there's something that can be done about it, we do something about it. So call us first.
Thank you. If we take another question from the audience, we would ask that you would come up in front of this microphone so we can hear, the people that were streaming will be able to hear the question. Does anyone have a question from the audience? Okay, come on up.
question is to whomever wants to take it, is when does a incident rise to the level of a threat, and how long a process is that? I understand you would have to investigate an incident in order to identify it as a threat, but I'm sort of curious about a time frame.
If I could answer that real quick. So as far as when does an incident rise to the level when it should be reported, like, please don't feel like that's a burden you should hold. That is with us. I've gotten calls, a crazy story. A family moved from Chicago. They bought some land in eastern Kentucky. Their neighbor did not like them moving into that property and would call them all kinds of names and harass them about being Yankees. She called me and thought that was a civil rights violation, and I had to explain to her that being from the North is not a protected class. And, you know, I was concerned about her, but told her, you know, if you feel threatened, call 911 and talk to your local police department. So the main goal of this is don't worry about the level of it, or if it's something that should be reported. Let us figure that out. Like, we've worked a number of these. We kind of know the laws a little bit. I mean, the attorneys really know them, but we pretty much know them, and can quickly kind of decipher, is this something that we need to continue to look into, or is this something that, you know, we can just document and put in a file somewhere, so if it happens again, we can start putting those puzzle pieces together. As far as the time goes, I'm confident. I mean, with the FBI, we will look at something as soon as it comes in, and I'm confident the police department is the same. You know, as far as how long it takes, especially in the federal system, from something to come into our office to when we get to put handcuffs on somebody, that could be years. It just, however long that investigation takes, however long a trial or the judicial process takes in order to get all the way through adjudication. But that really varies. But as far as us stepping up, making it a priority, and looking into it is almost immediate.
And that's similar. Don't worry about the nuts and bolts of legal. Is it this? Is it terroristic threatening? Is it harassment? Is it that's our job. You should call us the minute you feel threatened, whether it's technically a threat. And I would say, quite honestly, even sort of more openly, anytime you feel concerned, you know what's wrong. It's our job to articulate that, if possible, in a way that's suitable for court and investigation. That's what we do. And then as far as if it's an actual threat, so terroristic threatening would be the statute. Those are misdemeanor crimes. Those have a year to be reported and then investigated, and then the prosecution goes from there. But again, even if it's something that we can't generate enough information, evidence to develop probable cause, there's still that report there, and that could be important for the next case and the next case. So if you're concerned about something, if something just doesn't feel right in your neighborhood, that's when you give us a call. That's what we get paid very well to do, and that's what we get paid, and that's what we're trained very well to do, is to ask those questions. So if you have a concern, the officer comes out or a detective comes out and can ask those more probing questions to see, you know, where are we, what's the proper report to take. Some documentation, just by the fact that you called, has been made, and that's important. But whether we take a field interview report, which isn't a criminal report, it's just some information, whether we document it as a criminal report that ultimately can't be prosecuted, or it's something that we bring to prosecution, your concern is enough to call us to take action on it.
So to follow up on that, if I was driving my car and I stopped at a stop sign and someone blew through the stop sign and we crashed, and that person noticed that I was wearing my Jewish Federation shirt, and from taking information to report to our insurance companies, that person decided that I was making it up and causing a ruckus because I was Jewish, and then words became elevated. Would that be something that I would report?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
I can't say it any more succinctly than that.
So there's always that, that feeling of, I know I feel it, but I'm not sure if I'm feeling it enough to report it. I'm happy to say that that has never happened to me, but I know that there are incidents out there, and maybe not as many in our community, but we're lucky compared to what's going on throughout the country. So we host a lot of community events here in Lexington, and a lot of our members, right now they don't feel safe coming out due to COVID, but there is that sense of feeling like congregating out in larger public spaces as a Jewish community. When we host events, we might put up a sign that says Jewish Federation of the Bluegrass event here. And there is that feeling that if we let people know where we are, they will come and get us. That is a feeling of a lot of members, not necessarily just our community, but across the country. Is there something that the leadership of this community can share, that words or comfort that Lexington is a safe place, our students here are safe, our college students here on our UK campus and Transylvania University are safe? You know, there's a lot of talk about how our children are not safe in this community, and we don't necessarily have all the statistics to back up that they are safe. Is there anything that you guys can share with us to make sure that our community does feel safe?
You know, realistically, I can't make you any guarantees. I can tell you this, those type of incidents are rare here, and especially in Fayette County, just because our community does not put up with that. It never has. Lexington has that kind of small town, hometown feel, but it's a lot more progressive than what you think. With that being said, also realistically, the people that want to hurt other people know where they are. So keeping yourselves hidden is just doing yourself a disservice. You should get out and express yourself. You should get out and make known that you're here just like everybody else. I wouldn't be afraid to do that. I wouldn't keep from doing the things that I want to do. You know, and it doesn't hurt, you know. If you feel a little hinky about it, invite your local police officer to visit, especially if you're having a gathering or something like that, and invite them to come along. There's been times when things happen here, or somebody's going to have something in the community, they just shoot an email to the police chief saying, hey, just to let you know, this is going to happen. And you know what we do? We put our intel guys on it, and they start actively monitoring social media to see if anything comes across that something's going to happen, or somebody may be interested in it. And if something does, we alert the patrol commander or the duty commander, and then so that you don't get alarmed about it, we establish an extra patrol, and officers are patrolling that event more frequently. Or if you have just the slightest bit of information that some trouble might start, you can call and request that service. So there's a lot of things you can do, but definitely hiding and staying hidden, that promotes fear, and like I said before, that victimizes everybody, and nobody needs to be a part of that.
Thank you.
And if I can just add on that, another comforting point is that the FBI is a big organization. We have a lot of smart people who, up at our headquarters and various places around the country, will monitor social media for all those type of stuff. We have algorithms and that will scour the entire one side of the internet and the other, looking for these things. And we have a very good relationship with our law enforcement partners here on the local level and state level, and we always talk. If we're picking up a threat, if we're picking up any sort of chatter that might identify a certain activity, a certain location, we are communicating and we're making sure that we're putting things in place to ensure that nothing bad does happen. And if we do catch something that is of a threatening nature or something that we feel could endanger anybody, we have a duty to warn those folks. So if we did catch chatter of, hey, a certain gathering, some other group is talking about doing harm, we will contact that group and be like, hey, just for your awareness, we've got things working, but be advised that someone has put out a statement that they're going to, maybe do something here.
Since I'm the most recent one who's been a patrol officer, letting the patrol lieutenant or the patrol commander getting to know, that's Jesse Harris is the commander where you all are if you don't know him, and the lieutenants. But we would, as a patrol officer, not too far removed, we would love the opportunity to just come to an event where people are calling us to say, hey, we'd like to meet you. And that would be just an opportunity to interact in a way that's not, we always go to bad things, excuse me, and I think it would be an opportunity to interact in a positive way. And if you're giving away free meals, the police will show up. So.
And yes, we do give away free food. Is there any questions from the audience? Okay. Just come on up so we can hear you.
I can't help but ask if you were giving this talk to other groups in the community, the Asian community, the African American community, would you be saying basically the same thing in terms of the safety of Lexington and that really you have better intel and that things are not as, I mean, what I find hard to grasp is the reality that we see on the news every day versus what you guys are saying is not the case here in Lexington. But it almost sounds like you're saying that Lexington is an anomaly compared to some of the other communities around here.
Lexington is not. The majority, I think, feels, the majority of the United States of America feels the same way. The thing about the news media is you're getting a concentrated dose of it. Just think about it. If they show you an area where something's happening and they focus on it day after day after day after day, and then maybe another area they focus on it day after day, it makes it seem like that's happening all across the country day after day after day. When the reality of it is that's two places in America. To compound that, people get on social media and put their own spin and put their own twists on it, and some people exaggerate some things that are going on, and that helps perpetuate and promote that fear. What I suggest is every community should have regular meetings with their local police department. And for us, we do it at neighborhood association meetings, at church groups and everything. And they should have meetings where local police department come and talk about the crime statistics in their area, crime statistics over the city. Most of our officers that work a beat are permanently assigned to that beat. And when we have a neighborhood meeting, usually the supervisor of that area goes and the officer goes if they're available or free. And sometimes the lieutenant or commander will be there too. And they will openly talk about that and openly talk about your concerns. We did have a meeting with the Asian community and told them the exact same thing. And what we found out is that there are some people or some groups that perceive police differently. So we have the Citizens Police Academy. So what we did with that group is we offered up, hey, we will have if you get enough people together, we will put on a special Citizens Police Academy for you so you can know just what the police do here or just what the police have available because they didn't know. And those are just some of the things that we can offer. Whatever bureau you want to come and talk to your group, we'll make that happen. We're here for you. And that's what you need to know. All you got to do is ask. If we can't do it, we say, no, we can't do it. But seldom does that happen.
I'd like to follow up on the issue of perception of police. I think, I know that I missed the introductions at the beginning that we're dealing with local enforcement here, not Kentucky State. But I'm sure you're aware of the news that broke last fall about the very disturbing training that our colleagues at the Kentucky State Police were using and distributing to train their officers. Also in the Kentucky State Department of Criminal Justice was using similarly hate-filled images, quoting in a positive way from Hitler, among other awful people. And I wonder if you can speak to the follow-up on that. There were a lot of questions about how many officers were subjected to that training, what happened. I know the one officer stepped down, but that was certainly at least a moment for me that changed my perception at the state level of our police officers. So if you could speak to that, I'd be grateful.
I guess I drew the short straw on that one. I'll say that that incident was, or that situation is unfortunate. I'm not going to speak on what the thoughts were on why that kept in the curriculum or anything like that. What I will speak on is the fact that I work with KSP on a daily basis. And I know that there are good state troopers who are in just prioritizing the fact that they want to serve their community and serve their state. I know a lot of those troopers probably came up through that training and may have seen those slides, but I don't see that that necessarily changed their attitude towards equality for all the citizens in the state. They're good folks, they're hardworking folks, and you know, I work with them every day, like I said. We have many joint investigations with them, and I think that the agency altogether, once they identified that issue and realized what it meant or how that was interpreted, they quickly made changes to ensure that that did not remain in their curriculum.
Do you know what training has been done to continue education about Holocaust awareness, about the way that that kind of images signifies? I speak as Director of Jewish Studies in the UK, and I can say we have wonderful, qualified faculty who would be more than happy to help to that extent. But I think that knowing that there was some additional sensitivity training or contextual training would certainly reassure a lot of folks at the university about what's happening there. Sure.
Well, as far as specifically the anti-Semitism type study, you know, or lessons, you know, that sort of stuff, I don't know. I don't know their curriculum. I will say that they have added, the FBI goes down and does training for their academy on civil rights violations, and talks to them about what is considered a civil rights violation or a hate crime versus an actual just regular assault, so we can ensure that they're educated on the law from the federal standpoint and ensure that they are reporting that to us when they observe those things out in the field. As far as getting a specific course of study to counter anything that was in the previous curriculum, I'm not sure, but I would encourage you to contact the headquarters and offer that sort of help for something like that. I'm sure they would be open for it.
Great. Maybe we can talk after the other conference.
Sure.
I think, Justin, did you have a question?
So it was touched on a little bit before in a couple ways, and also recently mentioned the media, like that there have been incidents that, you know, were reported to the media as anti-Semitic hate crimes, and then investigations determined that wasn't the cause. So, you know, there's certainly a balance in wanting to make sure that awareness is spread and that our community is aware of things, but also wanting to make sure that we're promoting and spreading factual information. So do you have suggestions on like when is it appropriate to go, to report something to the media and, publicize an incident, and, how we can make sure that we're responsible, and don't jump to conclusions when doing so?
Chief gave me the nod, so. We would prefer a chance to get out in front of these incidents to vet those, I think, because if you go to the media first, and the media, I think, should certainly be your, how do I want to say, your sort of relief valve if you don't think you're getting proper service from us, but give us a chance to vet that information, to look into it, to speak with you. Because one of the problems that we find with the media is, as I spoke earlier, these investigations can take quite a long time. And in a media cycle, even a 3-month investigation, they're on to the next story and they're not coming back for the, oh yeah, remember that thing we made a big deal of? Turns out it's not much. That's never going to be a news story. So we would, as investigators, prefer to allow us to get out ahead of it, because what will often happen if it becomes a media story, then that starts coloring people's perceptions of things. Then we have to wade through a lot more rumors of incidents, or people who, well, this happened. Okay, now we've got to ask them, well, I heard that it happened. Well, I heard from someone that and that's going to take time away from that investigation. Not just time, but it's going to affect then, if it does go to trial, the idea of bias, for or against suspects and victims. And so we would just prefer that you come to us first, not because we want to hide anything, because we want to get out in front of it. There will be, if there is something, that's why we have a public information officer who, again, just given the nature of the work that I do, I work very closely with, unfortunately, although he's a very nice man. We'll make those media announcements. We're not here to hide anything. When we make if it comes to the point of an arrest or getting warrants, that's all public information. That's out there, and we're not doing anything to hide anything because it might be politically convenient or inconvenient. We will certainly make it known. If we can find and locate and bring to justice someone who is engaged in a hate crime, we want everyone to know about that, certainly.
You've been speaking about the reaction that the police have had to reported incidents. So it's been a very reactive kind of a situation. But what I'm wondering is if you're doing anything proactive to help the officers on the beat, or to help the chiefs and the commanders to recognize where a situation might develop, or to just sensitize them, so that the state police incident would not have happened, that they would have known. A lot of people now don't know anything about the Holocaust anymore. It's old history. And I think it drives some of the symbols, and it drives some of the language, and I think people use it without realizing what it is that they're doing. So I'd like to know if there's anything that's proactive on here.
So there's been a lot of big questions asked tonight, and a lot of good questions, and we appreciate that. I think what Chief Weathers does for our agency, what he expects from our officers, the training academy, over the past year or so, there's been a lot of attention given to the number of hours or how long a police academy is versus how long somebody has to go to a barber school, and what are you teaching them. And I'll make a couple of points and some jabs here. We're recruiting, we are hiring. I think the quality of people that we select to be a Lexington police officer is among the highest in the country. As Mindy said, I'm about, I've been here 29 years. Part of that time I spent 9 years with the FBI on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. I'm also a graduate of the FBI's National Academy, where you go to Quantico for 10 weeks from people internationally, 250 people in my class. And so we get exposed to a lot of cultures, a lot of opinions and ideas from around the world. And we recognize that Chief Weathers recognizes that importance of education. Part of our academy, we partner with Bluegrass Community Technical College, BCTC, and they actually come in for 9 or 10 weeks of our academy so that we round out our officers. You know, Eastern Kentucky has a great criminal justice program. Those people know they want to be the police. That's great, and that's a good program. But selfishly, or I think more appropriately, we look outside of those programs. We certainly go to there and find good candidates, but we're interested in well-rounded, educated people, teachers, social workers. I'll brag on Lieutenant Boyles. He's a PhD candidate, or whatever the term is. We have
philosophy of all.
Philosophy. You know, we have well-educated officers, and I'm proud of that. And I think Chief Weathers is too. And to your point in the back, we have a block of instruction that talks about bias-based policing, ethics. Lieutenant Boyles teaches. We spend a great deal of time having those discussions, and this is part of it. We will take back this conversation and push it down to our officers to let them know. They're very engaged. They're very well educated, but policing is fluid. It's changing. It has to change. We have to adapt to how we serve our communities, and it's important that we make those changes based on feedback, based on input from the people we serve. It's when you go to a restaurant, the waiter doesn't tell you what you're going to have to eat. You decide and you tell them how you'd like to be served and what you want to be served. It's kind of that way for law enforcement. We need to be open to change and to understand that and recognize it. And I think we do a pretty good job of that here in Lexington. We're hiring. We need good people. We need to represent all the communities that we serve. And if you know any good candidates, somebody that's interested, that has never thought about it. I was a chemistry biology major at the University of Kentucky, pre-med student. And here I am, out of 29 years later. I can't imagine sitting in a doctor's office all day dealing with sick people. I get to move around and hear wonderful stories from within the community, as Lieutenant Boyles pointed out. Most of the time, we don't get invited to birthday parties or to community events. It's a bad day. It's somebody's worst day when they're calling us to come and solve a problem. And we recognize that, but we enjoy the engagement. It's critically important in how we set our policies and how we train our officers to hear from people in the community. So I can't say it enough. We really appreciate being here and hearing from you.
And I'll have to say this, you know, before COVID, it was regular for the ADL to invite police departments to send their command staff or their trainers to the Holocaust Museum. And I was one of those lucky enough to get to go. And they sent me to LA. It was my first trip to LA, and that's where I went. Then when I went to the FBI Academy, it's mandatory that we went to the Holocaust Museum in DC. So when I made my trip to New York and I took my family, guess where we went? It's important to me that our officers understand and know the various cultures within their city. Even as recruits, we encourage them to do community projects with people that are different from them. That is the only way you're going to build trust. That is the only way you're going to build accountability. I don't care what laws they pass or what kind of requirements they make. If we don't talk to each other, we don't get to know each other, we're all going to be stuck in the same place. And I firmly believe that. And Lieutenant Boyles, I know from his ethics class, he talks about that as well. Meeting people where they are. Listening, understanding, empathy, all of those things, you know, you don't think that a police academy should teach or does teach or talk about. Those are the things that we talk about. Those are the things that keep us from going from one extreme to the other. Those are the things that make people come to us to report even those little things that go wrong. So that's why we put a lot more emphasis on it. For hate and bias training, it's repeated every 2 or every 3 years. Every 2 years, hate and bias training. So we get that. And sometimes we bring in people from the community, local people, so we can get that local perspective. And we don't just give them that clinical aspect of it. We try to make it as personal as possible.
Chief, one of the questions earlier.
Can you come up?
One of the questions earlier was talking about how people are not aware about the Holocaust, and many Holocaust survivors are passing away. Rabbi Warschachter is here with Temple Adat Israel. They have an excellent exhibit on the Holocaust. I'm sure he'd be open to having your officers come and just see what that has to say about.
No, we might be reaching out to them, because we'll be, you know, we just did our bias training, so it'll be a couple of years, but that'll be something, you know, because when we do our in-service classes, it's not just Lexington police officers there, it's sheriffs and it's school law enforcement that are there too. So that'd be something we'd probably be interested in and reach out to you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I can't speak for the rabbi, but I can speak.
And if I could, you know, from the FBI standpoint, as far as proactive investigation or proactive efforts that we make, you know, just to echo what Chief Weathers was talking about, the Holocaust Museum up in Washington, D.C., our training academy at Quantico is just a few miles down the road. Every single agent and analyst that goes through that academy will spend a day in that Holocaust Museum because it is such an important thing. And, you know, it is such a great museum and really touches your heart. As far as proactive measures that the FBI will take, we are measured on how many outreach or how many trainings we do every year. So we meet with the New Chiefs Association, who has a training down at DOCJT every couple months. All the new chiefs from around the state, we will go down and we'll do a presentation on civil rights. The statewide Jailers Association, we talk to those type of groups. We talk to the Sheriff's Associations. We even talk to the Constables Associations about civil rights violations. And y'all saw the case that we had just a few months ago, I guess it's probably over a year ago now, down in eastern Kentucky, where the 2 constables were committing those color of law violations. But those folks, they sat in my training and they signed their names where I talked about civil rights and how you can't do illegal search warrants and those sort of things. But we get out there and we talk to people. We've done over 50 of those across the state this year, even through COVID. Last year we did 74 of those trainings for law enforcement and for the community out there. And that is our proactive approach, because a hate crime, it's very hard to get ahead of that, right? We don't have sources that are waiting on the street corner just waiting to report a hate crime before it happens. We do that with gangs and drugs and counterterrorism and those sort of things. Hate crime is not something that we can really readily do that with. And that's why we do these outreach presentations and we talk to the communities, because we're hoping that we can learn about what the community is seeing, what things might be happening, what things might be growing, so we can better do our jobs when they do happen.
I do want to, yes, Rabbi.
First, I want to extend an appreciation and then ask a question, if I may. First of all, while it's been rightly pointed out by Alice that it is reactive, your reactions, Chief Weathers and gentlemen on this dais, have really been very excellent and are deeply appreciated, both after Pittsburgh and after Poway. The outreach from your office, your availability, your readiness to extend extra patrols, and Chief, your personal availability at the gathering at the superintendent's office in Nordsworthy Auditorium just a few days after the shootings in Louisville and in Pittsburgh meant more than you will ever know. So we're most grateful indeed. I do have a question in how we can partner with you in helping to field a question or concern. So shortly after Charlottesville, like many rabbis in the country, I started receiving comments via social media for expressing concern about the people who had been hospitalized, the young woman Heather Heyer who was killed, and expressing solidarity with the removal of Confederate statues. You probably remember the chant from Charlottesville, "Jews will not replace us." So I received a comment, God will replace you, just wait. So when this is sent to you from somebody who's outside the city, outside the state of Kentucky even, is that something that should go straight to the FBI? Should it be reported to the PD? Who do we go to when it's not that easy to categorize the nature of the threat? So that's what I'd like to.
So this is not an uncommon occurrence. I mean, we see this more and more, as Chief Weather was saying, the world is small now because of the connectivity we have with our, the internet, social media, and that sort of things. Oftentimes, we receive the exact same tips from our National Threat Operations Center. And so if you encounter something like this, the best thing to do is, like we've been talking the whole time, report it to law enforcement. Let us figure out if there's something more to it, because that incident may have only happened once to you, but it might have happened from that same person 50 other times. And hey, that's somebody we need to get ahead of, even though they may not have crossed that line into doing interstate threatening. Think back to you, it might be offensive, but it wasn't necessarily fit in that category of a criminal threat. But that would still rise to the level where we would want to talk to that individual. Our Threat Operations Center, you can easily submit a tip by going, it's an easy website, www.fbi.gov, and you look for the tips button, okay? You click on that tips button and a big form comes up, and you do have to provide your information because we need a way to recontact the victim to get more information or to get the IP address that sent you that threat or whatnot to identify who that is. So you do have to give your information. You do have to click a little button that says everything that you're providing is true and factual, and you're not sending us on a wild goose chase somewhere. But after that, it gets sent up to our headquarters, and then they determine, hey, where is that victim from? And they'll send it down to the field office. And then from there, I receive every single one of them that comes into the 25 counties that I'm responsible for here in Central Kentucky. I get every single tip that relates to anything in those 25 counties. And then I'll look at that, I'll assign it to an agent, and then we're off to the races. We do that pretty readily. There's also a telephone number if you don't want to do it on computer, and that's 1-800-CALL-FBI. Pretty easy to remember. So FBI.gov, click on the tips, 1-800-FBI, those threats will come, those incidents will come straight to us and we'll address them.
Maybe one follow-up. Like many of us here, I'm very heartened to hear that many of you have been to the Holocaust Museum. On a question of parallel and commiserate education, is the same experience happening with regard to the Native American Museum and the African American Museum in DC, where FBI agents, heads of police, etc., are having the opportunity to be educated at those institutions as well, please?
The only thing I can say about that is what I've seen is I think I rotated through when they were going to the Holocaust Museum, but I think they rotate those depending on when they hit them. I know we've have some people locally go to African American Museum. I don't know about the Native American Museum, but I would have to say they have, but where I've seen it, they rotated through. And if it's part of a structured class, I can understand that because they only allot so much time or so many blocks for each, so they rotated through. So I don't know if Commander Ingram went to something different that I did, but it's a possibility. I know they take all of that into account.
Yeah, we went to the Holocaust Museum, and then the 9/11 Museum up in New York as well. And then most of the museums in DC, the Smithsonian, So it was very good exposure. But again, it's important that when we are fortunate to go to those, we come back and talk directly with our recruits going to the academy. And I would offer that not only could we come do the local museum here at your temple, but maybe have the recruits come through on one day and be exposed to that. I think that'd be a good foundation for them as well.
I know Agent Hanna, it kind of sounded like, you know, all this formal stuff was going on. It's reported here and reported there. We're kind of spoiled here in Fayette County because we have an excellent relationship with our federal partners. So excellent that everybody has each other's cell phone number. Even some of our line detectives and line officers communicate directly with federal agents. So if you report something and that officer thinks, maybe I ought to let the FBI know about it, it's probably going to be a phone call that night or that day or the next day. It's not, you're not going to have to wait for something to travel through. I just wanted y'all to know that, and probably with the U.S. Attorney, probably with the Commonwealth Attorney, it's all going to be that same. Like I said, we're kind of spoiled here, but that stuff was happening when I started here, and it's been going for over 30 years, so I don't expect it to change anytime soon.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Yeah, would you guys like to start wrapping up?
Oh, well, I did kind of, it allows me to kind of touch on a couple different questions, particularly woman in the back and as well as you. So again, as the ethics instructor, I've learned to have the difficult questions and conversations with people, with the recruits. And I guess one thing I should say, I know, you know, we stand up here, this is good, this is great. I don't know what it's like to be from a marginalized minority community. I don't. I'm privileged in that way. I'm a middle-class white guy who's never experienced what you all experience or, you know, fear that you could experience. And one of the things, again, that Chief has done, and that I think the Lexington Police Department has done for a very long time, is encouraged diversity. So we get that interaction so that when we do encounter, we at least know what we don't know. And I think that is what I try and get across in our ethics program. I'm constantly talking about humility, being